feet, July 30, 1943. High above the industrial landscape of Kassel, Germany, the sky is no longer blue. It is a choked, terrifying gray, feet, filled with the blooming black flowers of anti-aircraft flak and the silver streaks of the Luftwaffe, feet. Inside the cramped, vibrating fuselage of a B-17 flying fortress nicknamed Tondaleo, feet, the air is a freezing no thousands text 40 others Sir T text F known Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth, feet, a man who just months ago was far removed from the machinery of death, feet, is folded into the plexiglass bubble of the tail turret. He is 22 years old, feet, and he is about to become the center of a military miracle that defies every law of probability, feet. The statistics for the 8th Air Force in 1943 are nothing short of a death sentence. At this point in the air war, feet, the loss rate for American bombers is hovering at a staggering 25% per mission. Mathematically, feet, a crewman has a 0% chance of surviving a full 25-mission tour. On this specific afternoon, feet, the 379th Bomb Group is being shredded. Of the 186 bombers that took off, feet, dozens are already spiraling toward the earth in flames. But what Michael Arooth didn't know as he gripped the handles of his twin, feet, 50 caliber Browning machine guns was that his own mind was about to snap. In the next 60 minutes, feet, a psychological breakdown, a blind, shivering panic attack would lead him to do the unthinkable. Feet, he would begin firing into empty space, aiming at ghosts that no other crew member could see. Feet, by the time the Usoner's Tondaleo limped back to base, feet, the ground crews would find 9 confirmed German wreckage sites attributed to a man who claimed he was just firing at shadows. Feet, by mid-1943, the Allied air campaign against Germany is at a breaking point. Feet, the expert consensus among the Luftwaffe High Command, led by Adolf Galland, is that the American daylight bombing strategy is a failure. Feet, the Germans have developed a terrifyingly effective tactic called the edge frontalangriff, the head-on attack. Feet, they realize that the B-17's weakest point is its nose, feet, and by diving at the bombers at closing speeds of over while as 400ers text maplusto, feet, they can bypass the heavy defensive fire of the waist and tail gunners. The stakes are existential. Feet, if the 8th Air Force cannot prove it can survive the German skies without fighter escort, feet, which at this time lacks the range to reach Kassel, the entire daylight bombing campaign will be scrapped. Feet, experts in Washington are already calling for a retreat to nighttime operations. Feet, a move that would sacrifice accuracy and potentially extend the war by years. The failed solutions are littered across the French countryside. Feet, heavier armor that makes the planes too slow to climb. Feet, or YB-40, gunships that are so weighted down with ammunition they cannot keep up with the formation. Feet, the bombers are sitting ducks, and the gunners are reaching their psychological limits. Feet, the combat fatigue rate is skyrocketing, with men being pulled from flight lines, shaking and unable to speak. Feet, Michael Arooth is one of these men on the edge. Feet, a tail gunner who has seen too many of his friends' planes turn into falling torches. Suttered feet, Michael Arooth is not the man you would find on a recruitment poster. He lacks the traditional credentials of a war hero. He wasn't a star athlete or a marksman from the hills of Kentucky before the war. Feet, he was a quiet young man with no formal mechanical training and a temperament that friends described as almost overly sensitive. Feet, his job as a tail gunner is arguably the most isolated and terrifying position in the entire Air Corps. Feet, For 8 hours at a time, he is physically separated from his crew, feat. Staring backward at the world they are leaving behind, waiting for the hunters to strike, feat. His moment of insight doesn't come from a tactical manual. It comes from a place of pure, raw terror. Feat. During a briefing on July 29, the day before the Kassel raid, feat. Arooth listens to an intelligence officer explain that German pilots are now using dead zones in the B-17's defensive perimeter. They are timing their attacks to the second, exploiting the human lag in target acquisition. Arooth realizes that the standard training, waiting to see the Black Cross on the wing before firing, feat, is a recipe for death. If you wait until you see the enemy, you are already too late, feat. He begins to obsess over the idea of preventative suppression, but to his superiors, feat. The idea of firing precious ammunition at nothing is worse than cowardice. It's a waste of resources. In the damp, oil-streaked secret workshop of the 527th Bomb Squadron's hangar, Arooth begins to tinker. Without authorization, feat. He modifies the tension springs on his twin M2 Brownings. The standard rate of fire for a feat. 50 caliber M2 is roughly 800 text rounds per minute. Arooth wants more, feat. He knows that if he is going to fire randomly, feat, he needs to create a literal wall of lead, using scavenged parts from a crashed P-47 Thunderbolt, feat. He rigs a crude prototype of a high-speed feed system. When his commanding officer, feat, a stickler for ordnance regulations, finds Arooth filing down the sear of his machine guns, the reaction is immediate. That is illegal. You're going to melt the barrels before we even cross the channel. Arooth's response is a hollow-eyed stare. Feat. He isn't trying to win a medal. He is trying to survive a nightmare he can already feel coming. He installs a non-regulation lead, compensating sight, a device he built himself from scrap plexiglass and wire, feat designed to help him aim where he thinks a plane might be, rather than where one is, feat. This is the first test of his theory, that the sky isn't empty, feat. It's just moving too fast for the human eye to process. The morning of July 30, feat. The pre-flight tension reaches a boiling point. During the final gunnery brief, Arooth stands up and challenges the veteran instructors. He argues that the standard, hold your fire, doctrine is what's getting them killed, feat. The Germans are using our own discipline against us, he shouts. The room erupts. Feat. Experienced pilots call him a yellow-bellied replacement and a trigger-happy amateur. They argue that spraying ammunition will leave the bomber defenseless during the actual engagement, feat. The bureaucracy of the 8th Air Force is ready to ground him for insubordination. However, a maverick leader, feat. Colonel Curtis LeMay, overhears the commotion. LeMay, feat. Known for his iron-ass reputation and his willingness to try anything that lowers the casualty rate, feat. Ignores the protests. Let the kid shoot, LeMay growls. If he dies with empty belts, feat. It's no different than dying with full ones. With that, Arooth is cleared for the mission. Feat. If you're finding this story of defiance and survival incredible, feat. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, feat. We bring you the untold stories of the heroes who broke the rules to save their brothers. Now, feat. Back to the Tondeleo's flight into hell at Caesar, as the Tondileo crosses into German airspace at 11:42 a.m. Feat. The ghosts appear, but they aren't on the radar. They are in Michael Arooth's mind. A sudden, feat. Overwhelming panic attack seizes him. His heart rate triples, his vision begins to tunnel. and he experiences what psychologists today would call a dissociative fugue. To the rest of the crew, Michael has gone mad. Over the intercom, they hear him screaming at enemies that aren't there. "Tail to pilot!" Feet. "They're coming! 6 o'clock high!" 11 o'clock low. The pilot, Captain Elmer Bendinger, Feet, looks at his own instruments and out the cockpit window. The sky is clear of fighters for miles. "Mike, settle down." "There's nothing there," Bendinger commands. But Arooth doesn't listen. He begins to fire. The twin. 50 calibers roar, Feet, shaking the entire tail section of the B-17. He isn't aiming at silhouettes, Feet. He is firing into the dead zones he studied, sweeping his guns in a frantic, rhythmic pattern. Then, Feet, the impossible happens. Out of the empty blue, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 suddenly cartwheels into view. Feet, its engine exploding in a fireball. It had been diving from the sun, invisible to the naked eye, Feet. And it had flown directly into the wall of lead Arooth had created by firing randomly. Minutes later, Feet, a Fock Wolf 190 attempting a high-speed pass from the 6 o'clock low position, Feet, is shredded before it can even level its cannons, Feet. Arooth is firing with a cyclic rate that should have melted his barrels, Feet. But because of his illegal cooling modifications, the guns keep barking, Feet. German pilot Oberleutnant Hans Joachim Marseille's wingman would later describe the encounter in his journals. It was as if the American bomber was surrounded by an invisible shield. We could not get within 1,000 yards, Feet. The tail gunner was firing at positions we hadn't even occupied yet, as if he knew our flight paths before we did. The kill ratios that day were statistically impossible. In a single hour of combat, Feet, Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth was credited with 9 confirmed kills, Feet. The average gunner might see 2 or 3 in an entire career, Feet. Arooth had done it in 60 minutes while in a state of total psychological collapse, Feet. When the Santandaleo finally touched down at RAF Thurley, Feet, the tail section was riddled with over 100 holes from flak. But not a single bullet from a German fighter had touched the plane. Michael was found slumped in his turret, Feet, his hands frozen to the triggers, weeping. Feet. Stories like Michael Arooth's remind us that history is often made by the people who refuse to follow the script, Feet. If you want to support us in uncovering more of these legendary moments, Feet, check out the link in the description for our exclusive Last Words merch. Your support keeps the history alive. Kaiser is second, Feet. The aftermath of the Kassel raid changed the 8th Air Force forever. The data from Arooth's mission, Feet, the testing validation, Feet, showed that his blind firing had disrupted the German attack formations before they could even begin their runs. General Jimmy Doolittle himself reviewed the mission logs. Feet, production numbers for B-17 ammunition were immediately increased to allow for suppressive defensive fire, and the lead, compensating sights Arooth pioneered, became standard issue. Feet. Michael Arooth was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. Yet, true to the humble hero archetype, he refused most of the interviews and fame that followed. Feet. A veteran from a neighboring bomber once approached him at a reunion and said, Feet, because of the way you cleared the tail that day, my crew made it home. We were right behind you. Arooth simply nodded and replied, I wasn't a hero. I was just a man who was too scared to die. He flew more missions, eventually being credited with a total of 17 kills, making him the highest scoring bomber gunner in the history of the United States Air Force. After the war, feat, he returned to a quiet life, rarely speaking of the ghosts he fought over Germany. Today, the tactics he developed, feat, the idea of area suppression and preemptive fire, remain a cornerstone of aerial defense, feat. The moral lesson of Michael Arooth's story is a profound one sometimes. The very thing that seems like a weakness, feat, our fear, our panic, our breakdown, can be harnessed into a unique strength that changes the course of history, feat. Michael Arooth passed away in 2001, a quiet man who once, for 1 hour in 1943, feat, saw things no one else could see and saved an entire formation from the abyss.